Hello and welcome to another episode of my Datsun 20Z Project Car Build. I'm Dave, this is Grindhouse Performance Engineering, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking through suspension geometry, alignment, and setting the ride height for the car. Break out your rulers and pencils, we're getting technical today. Stay tuned. Today's episode is an especially important part of the build. The adjustments that we're making are going to directly impact the responsiveness, the drivability, and the dynamics of the car under acceleration, braking, and turning. There's a ton of possible adjustments to the suspension on this car, so I've got to establish a baseline where I'm confident enough to be able to measure and order the custom wheels for the car. I don't want to just make measurements and order a set of wheels and then find out I've got to run spacers or do all these other adjustments where the wheels don't fit nicely anymore just because I wasn't paying attention on the front end. The first thing that I want to figure out today is the overall ride height for the car, front and rear. The reason I want to start here is all the other suspension geometries, the steering geometries, anything else that we're going to do is dependent on the ride height of the car. As soon as that's adjusted, everything else is going to change. To be able to do this, I picked up another set of wheel spacers. I've already got a set in the front that I was using when I dropped the engine in, but I picked up another set for the rear, and I'll be able to have all four wheels and tires off of my wife's Mustang, which she's super supportive of. Thanks, Ashley. So off camera, I've been adjusting the ride height quite a bit, playing with all the coilovers, jacking it up, making some adjustments, bringing it back down, seeing where it sits. And right now, I feel really happy with how everything sits. It looks a little bit high still, I do know that, but if you go under it, it's actually quite a bit lower than you think. So the lowest point that I went with for the front is actually under 4 inches, and keep in mind these tires are just a little bit taller than the ones I'm going to use on the car, so it's going to sit down even lower than this. But it looks absolutely killer. I'm super stoked. So there's a couple issues I've got to work through. The first of which, let me get down on the ground here. The sway bar here, actually at this ride height, is contacting the frame. So I'm actually pretty sure that the weight of the car right now is actually on the sway bar more than it is actually on the coilover. So I've got to drop the sway bar down and then add some clearance here so that the suspension can move more freely, because I'm pretty sure that everything at this ride height, it's bound up on the frame here. So the next issue is actually kind of a big one. What's going on here, I noticed it when I first put the front fenders on the car, because we already had the glass the rears, and I just put the fronts on. I remember I was sitting over there drinking a beer. I was super happy. I couldn't believe that they were finally on the car after waiting for as long as I did to do it. And I was looking, I was like, something doesn't look quite right. And if you look, we'll see if you can still notice it. Looking at the car from the side, and I noticed that while the car was on jack stands that were perfectly level, for whatever reason, the front fender arch was 5 inches higher than the rear fender arch. I freaking panicked. I couldn't believe that I was 5 inches off front to rear. What did I do wrong? How is this possible? How am I gonna correct this? What the heck happened? But then I started looking closer and I was like, well, you know, the body line here lines up great. Body line up top lines up great. Body line here lines up great. Body line here lines up great. And it did in the back and everything looked good. So I start checking things, I'm frantic, I have no idea what I did wrong. And then I contacted the folks at Z-Trix who made all the fiberglass parts for the car, and they said, no, Dave, that's fine. We build them that way because the original car that the molds were made off of had a 14-inch wheel and a much shorter tire. And he said, well, you know, we get different kinds of cars of all different types. You know, we get drag racing folks, track day folks, whatever. And some folks will actually, you know, rake the car so much in the rear that, you know, there's no reason to adjust it. And it's always easier to remove material than it is to add it. So I left it alone at that time because I was like, well, I really want to see what the ride height's going to look like before I start messing with it, and I'll just deal with it then. Well, now we know that at the ride height that we want, we actually have way too much tire tuck. And when we have the right offset wheel here, and it's gonna be right up on here, we're gonna have to take probably 2 inches out of this. But like I said, when I first started and the car was level, it was 5 inches. So we do have a fair amount of rake front to back so that we can clear the dual 3-inch exhaust under the differential in the rear. But that'll have to get dealt with. I'm gonna get started with the sway bar, get that out of the way, get it all clearanced, and then we'll take it from there. So I took the body panels off because it'd be a little bit easier for me to illustrate and show you guys what I'm talking about when we're making the suspension adjustments to really fine tune everything and get everything set. And it's been like, what, 2 episodes since the last time I pulled the panels off, so we were due, right? But anyway, before we get into the next set of adjustments, the sway bar now has clearance, so we can actually move the suspension. It's no longer sitting on the sway bar, and that's really good. That's a step in the right direction. But before we do the next thing, I have a couple of quick announcements. 1, we're over 1,000 subscribers. What? That's amazing. It's so cool that in such a short period of time, I never expected how many people would be reaching out and thanking me and telling me that they're working on something really similar and I helped them get through something that they were struggling with or that they just wanted to see before I got into it. That's incredible, and that means so much to me. And to already be over 1,000 subscribers is absolutely freaking huge. So thank you so much for that. That means the freaking world to me. And I can't wait to see how much farther we go as we get into this car even further. Number 2, some people noticed this in the last episode, but I thought I'd highlight it. I have 2 different hats for sale. They are Grindhouse Performance Engineering hats. I've got the gray and the black because those are kind of like comfort colors for me, and that's easy. And then I actually went out and I did the red, the white, and the blue. You know, the country's in a really weird spot. It's been in a really weird spot the last few months, and it meant a lot to me. You know, this country means a lot to me, and I thought it'd be cool to do something like that. So they're on the website. There's a link in the description. Go ahead, check them out. Pick one up if you like. If not, I'll wear them. Number 3, it has been a while since my last video, and that has been a little bit intentional. I've been working on something that's a really, really, really big deal, but unfortunately it has completely taken away my time and availability to be in the shop. But the reason for that is we're getting very close to me being able to produce a lot more content for you guys. And that's all I'm gonna say, because it's a really big deal and it's super important to me, and we're getting very close. So really exciting announcements coming soon. This next part is gonna go one of two ways. I'm either going to have some sweet graphics from my absolutely amateur editing skills, or I'm basically gonna be walking around with my hands waving around like an idiot for the next couple minutes. So we'll see which one it is when it's on YouTube. Now that we've made clearance for the sway bar, the first thing that we want to address is the roll center geometry. What is roll center? Roll center is the point in which the body of the car rolls. There's a point in the rear and there's a point in the front. And that creates a roll axis. And if you can imagine that imaginary line going through the car, that's where everything pivots about. So when you're thinking about roll center, which again is this point down here, and then you have another point up here, this is your center of gravity. This center of gravity is the entire weight of the car represented in one imaginary point. So if you have your roll center down here and your center of gravity here, the distance between these things become really important. And to really oversimplify it, if you think about a ratchet and you say, okay, the distance between the head of the ratchet and the base of the ratchet is going to be the distance of the center of gravity to your roll center. If you think about this ratchet compared to this ratchet, you have a lot more torque that you can put on this ratchet. You have a lot more force. So your inputs on the end here have a much greater effect on the end here. The same could be said with your roll center and your center of gravity. If this distance is really big, that means that any movement of the car is going to result in a really big roll. Since the roll center is an imaginary point that the suspension rolls the car around, it can actually be underground. Now, if you imagine you have your center of gravity up here, and then you have the ground here, well, it's still gonna have that effect. But what happens is all that distance that's underground now becomes force directly applied to your suspension and directly applied to your tires. Now, this can be very good because it means you have a lot of feedback. When you're driving and you have your hands on the wheel, you're really gonna know when you're fighting it that you're fighting it, because the weight of the car is really putting that weight on the tire. It also can be really bad because you run the risk of overloading the tire, and then your steering effort can cause fatigue, or it could just not really be all that enjoyable to drive. So with that long-winded explanation out of the way, what are we gonna do? Well, on this car, the Apex engineered front cross member gives you a couple of adjustment points. So, really simply, all that explanation, I'm gonna loosen those bolts and I'm gonna move the control arm. So I'm not sure if you caught it. When I brought the car back down, it did something really interesting in the front end. If you'll notice, now both of the front wheels actually point in. Both of them do. I didn't adjust the tie rods at all. All I did was adjust the roll center so that we can adjust the instant center. Now why is that? What just happened? So if your tie rod is situated at one angle and your lower control arm is situated at a different angle, that they have different instant center locations out on the other side of the car. The center of the tire is going to have one path that it travels, or one arc as it articulates through the suspension, and the steering is going to have a different arc that's going to travel at a different rate depending on where you are in the suspension travel. This is also called bump steer. This is really problematic. This makes driving very unpredictable. If you hit a pothole and the steering jerks and the car pats really aggressively somewhere. So to actually fix this, there's a couple different things we can do. We can take the mounting points here and bring the center of the steering rack up, of course, until we hit a limiting area here. Or we can take the tie rod, which you can see in red, right up in the front, and we can bring the outer part of this down. And when this angle is the same angle as the lower control arm, we're gonna know that we've eliminated the bump steer. And with that terrible explanation of suspension geometry, I feel like we've got the car set up now in a pretty good place to where we're not going to have any binding. This is by no means the final alignment of the car. I just want to make sure that everything was in enough of a good ballpark that we would feel comfortable to be able to measure and order the custom wheels, because they are very expensive and I do not want to have to do it twice. In the next few episodes, we've got a lot of cool stuff coming. I can't wait to share it with you guys, and I will see you in the next episode.